Yo, yo, Bobby, what's going on, my man? How are you?
Matt, we're back. Another episode of the Ombudsman Report.
Yes, another episode of the Ombudsman Report. Welcome. This is episode 20. Can you believe
Wow, is it really?
it's been 20 weeks? Yeah, yeah. Crazy to think. It was only, 20 weeks ago we decided we were going to fire this thing up and see what happens, and I'm pretty pleased so far. So, 20 more.
Yeah, here we are.
So, how you been, man? I just got done. I'm pretty disappointed watching that England-Croatia World Cup game. Really wanted England to bring it home. Obviously, I'm English, so it was a little disappointing. I know my grandfather's going to be pretty pissed.
Fair enough.
Would have liked
Yeah,
to see a France-England final, 100 Years' War.
I definitely would have tuned in for that. If I'm free, maybe I'll watch Croatia and France go at it. I can't say I've really watched, honestly, very much of it at all. I've caught the highlights just to stay in the know, but I mean, I played soccer my whole life. You know that. I haven't caught a game, so I'm just a little bummed the U.S. isn't in it.
Yeah, they'll be in the next one. It's been a fantastic World Cup. Definitely one they'll be
A
talking
lot of
about for a
overtimes. I saw
while.
Croatia beat Russia in PKs in Russia. That's always sweet.
A lot of overtime, a lot of free kicks, a lot of penalties. So it gets the stuff that gets the average soccer fan or like the people who don't really know soccer too much excited is
Right,
like
not
the
a lot
free
of ties.
kicks, the penalty kicks, stuff like that. Yeah, but welcome if you're listening. My name is Matthew Spurrier. Join with me as always, co-host Bobby Juliana. We do this every week. We talk about news, politics, culture. We kind of just fool around, talk, give our opinions about the week's stories. And it was another pretty busy week, as always. It's Trump's America. There isn't a down day, even in the summer months, right?
The news rolls along.
The news keeps on rolling along. So even though we've kind of forgot about the children at the border who are being separated from their families,
Yeah, whatever happened to that? Are they still in cages? Are they still reunited with your family? Where do we stand there? Does it not matter anymore? There's other things to get to.
the nature of America in 2018 is it only matters for as long as the talking heads on TV are talking about it.
Well, it only matters as long as it's politically expedient.
Right, exactly. As soon as they found out that, actually, I guess it is still a little relevant because over the 4th of July weekend, like you saw, people climb the Statue of Liberty with Abolish ICE. Abolish ICE is like this new meme that's going around the left, and they're pretending that this isn't the real left.
I saw that.
A bunch of assholes climb the Statue of Liberty, and of course, after 9/11, if someone's climbing the Statue of Liberty on
Right.
4th of July, that's
Yeah, they shut down the whole island.
That's a pretty serious thing.
Like, way to
Yeah.
ruin everyone's day.
Yeah, well, because it's about me, me, me. Look how good I am. I climbed the Statue of Liberty to abolish ICE. I want to do it. I am so caring. I'm so perfect. Meanwhile,
Yeah, and the person got up there and was like, "I'm not coming down until all the children are reunited." Gets down like an hour later.
yeah, of course, because he doesn't have any real stomach. They just want to get the attention. Maybe someone from Mother Jones will come and email him and give him an interview or something.
Right.
But yeah, anyway, so huge news, obviously. If you haven't heard by now, Donald Trump in our, I guess it was this season's or this term's version of The Bachelor,
Right.
where Trump had the roses and he decided to give the final red rose to Brett Kavanaugh to be the newest Supreme Court justice. What are your initial thoughts on Brett Kavanaugh? Just
I
being
thought it
a
was an
conservative.
interesting pick. If everyone remembers back, I think I predicted Amy Coney Barrett for the pick by Trump, and she was in the running towards the end. He's picking obviously from that list of 25 that he announced during his campaign, and that list has grown some controversy because it was pretty much drafted by the Federalist Society, which completely in the bounds mainstream, constitutional conservative group.
Right.
And I mean, I don't have a problem with pretty much anyone on the list. Mike Lee is on the list. I think Mike Lee would have been a great pick. You're not going to lose that seat in Utah.
No.
Anyway, it was narrowed down to Kavanaugh, Amy Coney Barrett. Tim Hardiman came in later, and Raymond Kethledge. And, Kavanaugh had been the favorite for a while, ever since Kennedy announced his retirement. It was him and Amy Coney Barrett. And then it was sort of just those two. And then Barrett sort of fell out of favor. Kavanaugh stayed, and the other two came in. But, yeah, eventually picked Brett Kavanaugh. He's United States Court of Appeals judge in the District of Columbia.
Right, 12 years, right?
Right. He's been on there for 12 years. The pick, I don't know, Matt. I saw a lot of commentators talking about it. They're like, compared to Gorsuch, if Gorsuch is a home run, Brett Kavanaugh is a stand-up double. And I tend to agree with that. I mean, I'm not obviously going to come up here and tell you, yeah, been following Brett Kavanaugh for a long time. Like pretty much everyone else, you hear his name 2 weeks ago and you start to look into him because you didn't really know him before then. You know, from what I can gather, he is obviously a constitutional conservative. I would assume if he was voting when he votes conservative. Based on his statements during his speech, if anyone watched, believes strongly in the Constitution, is an originalist, which is what you look for, someone who interprets the document as the way it was written at the time. It's not a living document.
Which is really, can I just point this out, which is interesting, is that it's seen that if you're a judge who is an originalist and a defender of the Constitution,
that's seen as radical.
You're a radical conservative. Like, it's immediate that, it's just funny to me how every single time there's a constitutionalist up for, the Supreme Court or all of these candidates, they always come down on the right. And I don't know if that says something to, are Republicans pretending they're constitutionalists? I don't think that's the case. I think they are. I think that the left-wing judges aren't constitutionalists. They think that the Constitution is a breathing document that we can change, like Ruth Bader Ginsburg, right? Ruth Bader Ginsburg likes to take the Constitution, sort of look at it and say, but it'd be much better if we could do, healthcare for everyone. And she just sort of like makes it up and picks and chooses little lines to reinterpret.
Which is essentially a lot of conservatives, their problem with the way the court has acted and the way Justice Kennedy voted in the later years of his time on the court. Gay marriage being a case. I don't remember the exact name of the case, but essentially the way that came about was that the court instead of making a ruling on a law, they changed the law to fit what they wanted to get done. So it's essentially the court passing law, which is something that Gorsuch should stand against, something that Kavanaugh stands against. And, that's sort of something that happened with Obamacare, which is somewhere that Kavanaugh's got a little flack recently. He was sort of actually the first judge to interpret it. He interpreted an early case that eventually laid some precedent for keeping Obamacare law, which eventually went to the Supreme Court and passed 5-4. So he was sort of one of the first judges to look at it and interpret the individual mandate as a tax. And because
rather
of that,
rather than a fine, correct?
Rather than a fine, right? And because it's a tax, then that fell into a whole different area of the law where it's not the court's place to overrule the tax. That's something that Congress does. So he basically took the court out of the ability to strike down Obamacare, full stop. And then that same language and reasoning was used by the Supreme Court to uphold it. So it's really interesting to see him now get attacked from the left and the right on the healthcare issue. You'll see the right attack him for doing just that, for sort of providing the basis for keeping Obamacare around. But you'll also see the left. I mean, I saw Chuck Schumer today saying he's going to decimate healthcare because in other rulings in healthcare cases, he's very much against, I guess you could call it the administrative state. So essentially, he believes that the court has the power in suits. So administrative state examples would be if you were to sue the EPA for something and the EPA has their own sort of, hearing to decide that matter and you lose that, you should, in his mind, be able to take that to then the courts. Mm-hmm. Okay. But the administrative state powers, in terms of a view from someone on the left, would be that no, the EPA has its own, it has its own ruling and that stands there. So when he does that in terms of healthcare, they see that as decimating healthcare. I see that as,
for people, if I'm mistaken here, and correct me if I'm wrong, but what that sort of means for someone, and this was recently explained to me and read, is that it was basically he ruled against the EPA judging itself and finding itself clean. Correct. So it was sort of like these kangaroo courts, for example, like you'll see on college campuses that are really popular with some right-wing media, where, or police officers, for example, where the police did an internal investigation, the police found that we did nothing wrong, therefore we're not moving forward with prosecution. And he said, well, no, you can't, you have a conflict of interest because you are the party being sued. So you should be able to take that to the Supreme Court. And the courts can be sort of like a third, eye or opinion and sort of arbitration. I'm getting all my a lot of legal reading in the past 2 weeks, like you were saying, trying to figure out who the hell Kavanaugh is.
No, but he's correct in that because, I mean, especially in today's day and age, the executive branch continues to grow.
Mm-hmm.
Unprecedented growth under Trump or under Obama. It's not really stopping under Trump in terms of the dollar amounts of the government. But, you know, if you can't fight a case or an unelected bureaucracy is the final say on an issue, then you really don't have
Any recourse for
any recourse. Exactly.
action.
So in that issue, conservatives will like him on that, on his ability to fight, the growth of the state. Being in D.C. on the appellate court, he was very strong on guns. I'm seeing a lot of attacks on him there from the left. He wrote a number of dissents because he was sort of outruled. Funny, he's actually on the same. Merrick Garland is from the D.C. appellate court as well. So, the last.
This guy, he hung around bipartisan, courtrooms and clerks and judge. Right, he was a clerk for Justice Anthony Kennedy. He went to Yale Law School with all of these lefties. And I don't know if you saw Yale, a bunch of former alumni and
I see that. Did
professors.
They sort of apologize?
No, so Yale, you're a college, and one of your alumni just got promoted to the Supreme Court again. Yale's a very prestigious law school. They have people on the Supreme Court. That's nothing new. So they put out sort of a little message saying, Brett Kavanaugh was class of blah, 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 and he served on the 12th Court of Appeals and blah. And so a bunch of, I'm assuming they're lefties. I'm assuming it's not a bunch of constitutional conservatives writing this letter. Professors and judges, activists, former alum, penned a letter saying that they're ashamed that Brett Kavanaugh and their school alumni would ever be proud to put this monster on the court that potentially would overthrow women's rights and will send us back to Jim Crow slavery, essentially, is what they're getting at. And it just points to the fact where, if you look into the bio of Kavanaugh, and it's 2018. If someone has dirt on them, you're gonna find it. Okay, let's not pretend, right? We've got dick pics of Anthony Weiner. All right, Hubert Abedine's husband, and this guy is clean. This guy is a Catholic school dad, 2 daughters, serves a soup kitchen. Right, he's a basketball coach. Was friends with people on the left and the right during his entire career. Wrote a bunch of dissents, and they're just angry because they don't like the way the cards fell when they decided to, they just don't like the way the chips fell. That's right. To be honest. And we talked about the last podcast and Mitch McConnell saying, you guys will regret this sooner than you think. And boy, oh boy, do they regret it.
No, they are regretting it now. Well, sort of to go back on some of the things you said there, they're going to make issues of his past. He's you can't argue that he's totally clean because some of his, he is. Let's just say he is clean in the sense that none of his past is disqualifying for being nominated and being approved for the Supreme Court. However, they're going to make hay of him being, he was a White House staff secretary for George W. Bush.
That's a separate issue than what I've seen sort of some of the criticisms of him, though.
Well, no, the criticisms prove that there's really nothing there. I saw today that, well, first off, they're making fun of his name, Brett. They're saying he's like a white frat boy. But second off, they found his Georgetown prep, his high school yearbook, where he listed himself as treasurer of the Keg Club. Okay.
Oh, God forbid. Right. Meanwhile, Barack Obama.
So like you said, if they can find his high school yearbook with treasurer of the Keg Club in there, they have everything that they have on him. There's nothing more that they can get. There's nothing that's so egregious it's disqualifying for nomination and approval. And when it comes down to it, they have no way to block him from getting on there. The Republicans have the votes. As soon as it becomes clear that they're probably going to get him passed, given McCain being out of the Senate because of his health issues and the Republicans that like to drag their feet, once it's clear that he's going to have the votes, you're going to see a couple of Democrats jump ship because they need to look good for the upcoming elections. And so he's going to get through. He'll probably get 52 or 53 votes, just like Gorsuch did. And, I don't know what the Democrats think that they are going to accomplish here. I guess they think if they drag this out, if they make it go long, if they make hay of a couple different things that, essentially they're going to have to twist the facts on because, it's not egregious enough to make that big of an issue on, and they drag this out, they think they can fire up their base, but they're not going to stop him getting through. He will be a Supreme Court justice. I guess the only downside would be maybe there's thought that if Trump picked, Barrett or someone more in
steadfast in their beliefs against like Roe, for example.
Right.
Like, when Kavanaugh, jogged up to the podium for his acceptance, a sort of nomination, he included in there that he wants to respect precedent. And that was basically some, a little flag to the liberals saying,
right.
I'm not going to, do you think I'm going to put the robe on and then the next day we're overturning Roe?
Right.
That's not going to happen. Overturning Roe v. Wade isn't going to happen. Again, right, it isn't how it works. Right.
I'm seeing people say like, "Oh, Brett Kavanaugh's going to get approved, and your women's health rights are going to be gone, and your health care, and you're basically going to be like a Handmaid's Tale again." Like, first
but also think about what the women's rights they're talking about is, because what they're talking about is just access to abortion.
Essentially, abortion.
And I mean,
and even if Roe were to be overturned, I think we touched on this last week. Say that tomorrow the Supreme Court blanketly shoots down Roe, a case comes up, they rule against it, they rule Roe v. Wade unconstitutional. Essentially, all that would do is remove abortion on the federal level, and it would empower the state's own laws against abortion. Well, then what would happen? All of the blue states, California, Massachusetts, they're not going to get rid of abortion, And the thought is, especially with Kavanaugh in respect to Roe, that he is going to be less of a sledgehammer that you might expect from like Clarence Thomas or what you would hope from Justice Gorsuch, but he would more of be like Justice Roberts, where they wouldn't blanket overturn Roe, but they would walk back some of the steps of it. There was a separate case, Planned Parenthood versus Casey, in which they made that undue burden clause, which you hear sometimes.
Okay.
Which is essentially if you pass a law in a certain state, it can't enforce an undue burden to prevent a woman from getting an abortion. So there was a case in Texas like a year ago where they, like a religious, they essentially closed a number of health facilities, and there was a number of women in Texas obviously had a long distance then to travel to get an abortion, and they were saying, is that an undue burden?
Oh, so okay. I vaguely remember this, yeah.
Right. There's a number of ways you can, and I might have mischaracterized that, but again, the undue burden clause is what came up. And essentially, the thought is he's not going to be one of those justices that if it did come up, he wouldn't vote against an overturn, but he would help walk back incrementally, certain things like that he disapproves of.
And what I've also heard floated around is that Amy Barrett, like the slugger, right, the Aaron Judge of the picks, in the lineup.
At least that's the thought was.
The thought, and well, what I'm hearing floating around is, let's be honest here. It's kind of freaky that the Supreme Court is everyone watching and waiting until a Supreme Court justice dies, and then they get excited, and it's sort of freaky, right? And what I've heard is, if Donald Trump wins in 2018, he has a chance for a third Supreme Court justice pick, and if he did, give that to someone like Amy Barrett, I mean, that really is winning the court for a generation for conservatives. Like, that is the home run. That's what the MAGA people are, celebrating now, as if they've got a constitutional court of conservatives for a generation. If they put Amy Barrett in, that would actually happen.
Well, speaking of, the death watch, I actually was doing that yesterday. I was just scrolling through and looking at the ages of all the Supreme Court justices. And so, say he does hold on to the Senate in 2018 and Ruth Bader Ginsburg doesn't make it to 2020. The Democrats are going to have a weekend at Bernie situation on their hands where they're holding up Ruth Bader Ginsburg to keep the votes.
That is a case where, well, did you see that? Did you see that Politico writer went and did Ruth Bader Ginsburg's workout? And it was like it decimated him. It ruined him. And it was like this 28-year-old reporter with like 15-pound dumbbells that like couldn't keep up with what an 84-year-old woman does.
God, they're such pansies.
But, well, see, I don't know if the McConnell rule would apply in 2019. It is a presidential election, but it's not.
No,
it's not.
It wouldn't. Do you see it wouldn't because. Why? Do you think McConnell is really going to take that chance and be like, well, I set the precedent, and not in writing, just in theory? Politicians go back on their word literally before and after elections all the time. So if that were the case, I mean, Schumer and Pelosi, if Pelosi still Speaker of the House, they would freak out, obviously, and sort of rightly so. They'd be like, "Yo, man, you said you were going to wait," but I mean, they wouldn't do it. He would still vote to confirm.
Here's the thing: the reason Merrick Garland didn't get approved is because Republicans had control of the Senate.
Right.
And so because of that, they said, well, it's a presidential election year, so we'll wait, and the next president will get to approve it, and then we'll have to put them through, even if the Republicans control it and Hillary wins, because then you can't delay for 4 years. So, I mean, if it's 2019, Trump has control of the Senate, and he gets another pick, they're going to put it right through. They're going to rush it before the election. They're going to have the votes, and they're going to do it. But then beyond that, okay, so say you keep playing this long game like we're thinking he is with Amy Barrett replacing, most likely Ruth Bader Ginsburg with her, that goes into 2020 to 2024. Stephen Breyer is getting old. I don't remember how old he was. I think he's close to 80. He's the second oldest behind Ruth Bader Ginsburg. Okay, and then behind that is Clarence Thomas, and he's only like 70 or 72. So, there's going to be 3 more picks in the next 10 years. It's
wow.
Weird how we're looking at it for the timing. If Trump loses and then a Democrat gets in for 8 years, they could potentially get, 3 picks. But then you got to look at that the ideology of the picks. So there's basically the next 2 to go are both liberals. So it's just it's interesting, and this is not how it should be. I mean,
right. I mean, in a perfect world,
we're fighting over 9 unelected people in
80-year-olds.
Robes. But the thing is,
in robes.
we're hoping that we can get someone. See, at least as I mean, I'm conservative, and I approve of of Gorsuch and Kavanaugh, because just as he said in his accepting speech, I'm not going to get on the court and I'm basically governed by the Constitution.
Right.
If you want to pass a law and change something within the Constitution, I'll then follow that. But I'm not going to come up with my own statutes or even use my own preferences and beliefs to change law, to change whatever comes in front of me. So the thing with the liberals is, though, they want activist judges. They want judges to then, I saw a bunch of pieces like the Supreme Court has been pushing our society forward. It's like, it's not really what they're there for. They're there to interpret the law. So it's he's going to get on, and then we'll just see how long this nomination takes. If they want to drag their feet, or if they want to let this go through and they can get to a different issue for the midterms. But he's not going to get held up.
Yeah, and we talked a little bit about sort of the reaction, because as everything these days, the overreaction is pretty ridiculous. And so right. I just wanted to play this video because there were a couple examples of the left basically deciding that whoever was picked was going to be the worst candidate to be considered of all time.
Right. It's always apocalypse.
But I want to play this first because I want you to, and you might want to hold on to your ribs, because this is some real big comedy coming at you. So this is Stephen Colbert telling great jokes on the Late Show.
Skeptical because his name is Brett. That sounds less like a Supreme Court justice and more like a waiter at Ruby Tuesdays. Hey everybody, I'm Brett. I'll be your Supreme Court justice tonight. Before you sit down, let me just clear away these rights for you.
Yeah.
Wait. Let me get this straight. A white guy named Steven is making fun of a white guy named Brett for his name?
Don't think about it too hard. It was probably the writers who came up with this. And I play that because it's just so funny how they're allowed to. So now we can just make fun of Ruby Tuesday waiters or something. We're allowed to make fun of the working class. I thought, how dare you ever punch down on someone that can't defend themselves? I thought those are people just trying to work and feed their families.
They don't care about the workers anymore, Matt.
No, I mean, well, they say they do. Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez apparently cares about the workers and the minimum wage. I just play that because that's not funny.
It's not comedy anymore. It's late night therapy. I told you this.
And I don't want to be, the wet blanket on. I like comedy from all places. I mean, you know me. I like Bill Maher. I watch John Oliver's show. I think sometimes he can be fun. Even John Oliver, who I know you don't like, I think it'd be pretty funny. Bill Maher, who I know you vehemently don't like,
No,
I think it'd be
can
pretty
respect
funny.
Bill Maher. At least he's semi-consistent.
Right, it's semi-consistent,
and
but
he's willing to engage in some conversations.
Stephen Colbert, what's the joke? Oh, his name's Brett. This frat boy named Brett is gonna get your hands off my pussy. Like, what are you talking about? This is so ridiculous, and it's because there is a demand for evil Nazis in America that are trying to control all the minorities and women in the world, and it's just not true. There's no supply. They're running out, and now, the Women's March, they released a statement where they were coming out against Donald Trump's pick, and no matter who Donald Trump pick is a fascist, whatever.
Right, of course.
And they didn't even put his name in there. They just had XX to place the name because it was clearly a placeholder. It was a pre-written placeholder. And, Slate runs an article where they were talking about Brett Kavanaugh being the worst person ever, and they used a picture of Hardiman, who was another candidate that was being considered. And so it's like, you guys aren't even trying. You wrote the pieces on why this is the worst thing to ever happen to the United States 3 nights ago. Right. So stop pretending you're reacting to the day's news as if this is some, you're some analyst.
It's actually the worst thing ever.
It's not.
It's fake outrage, dude. We were supposed to have been dead from tax reform and net neutrality by now, but now Kavanaugh is going to kill us. That's the next one.
The tax returns, as Nancy Pelosi put it, was the Armageddon.
Right.
I'm still waiting.
Well, did you see Terry McAuliffe? Governor of Virginia? Put out a tweet, and he's basically saying, if Brett Kavanaugh is elected, this will lead to the deaths of millions of women in the future for healthcare reasons. It'll lead to the death of women that this guy is on the Supreme Court. Think about how crazy that is.
That's an elected official.
And people just let that go. Oh, yeah, that's possible. Oh, it's possible. It's like, no.
It's not possible.
The thing is, Cocaine Mitch got out there. God, I used to hate Mitch McConnell, and now I realize that was just whipped up, that was some Mark Levin whipped up anger on the AM airwaves. I got to be honest when I realized I was wrong. But he gets up there and he starts talking and he says, these are the same things we've heard, not just for a Supreme Court pick, which we have, because let's be honest, they never used to be this divisive. If you go back, Supreme Court's picks were getting 97-1 votes. They were getting almost 100% in the Senate. Until Ted Kennedy decided to attack Borking became a term. And then it carried forward, and then Clarence Thomas, where he said this is a national disgrace, this is a high tech lynching. They decided to assassinate his character.
Wow.
Okay. Yeah, you never seen that?
No, I haven't.
You should look that up. His hearings, dude, they were a disgrace. And ever since then, it's just been a matter of assassinating the other side's pick for the Supreme Court in the hopes that you can knock them out and they'll pick someone more to your favor.
Well, because this is it, and you touched on this earlier. We both did. It's because now the Supreme Court is a game where you need your ideology to win, or you're afraid the other side is just going to use their ideology to win.
Right.
And we've become enemies. We're enemies. We're mortal enemies. And so
it goes along with the decrease in power that Congress has just been giving up their power for the last 50 years. The executive and the judiciary has been sucking it up. And because of that, now we fight over 9 old people in robes, and every 4 years we fight over the presidency. And you get people making it out to be disaster if someone that they don't approve of wins, when the answer could be shrink the government or re-empower Congress. But no, we don't like to play the logical game.
And for those who are sort of unaware of what you mean, and feel free to add on to this of what you mean when you say Congress is losing power. And it's sort of because it's really easy for people who are running for Congress, right, Senate representatives, to go out and campaign and make all these big promises and say, I'm going to do this, I'm going to do that, I'm going to do, we're bringing back jobs, I'm giving all health care, we're raising minimum wage, Social Security, right? It's easy to do that. And then when you get to the Senate and you actually have to do the hard part of determining policy.
Right.
And Rand Paul couldn't even get a Read the Bill Act passed. These guys don't do their job.
No.
Right. They're
and the
there
thing is,
to
especially
fall
with
in
the
party
House,
lines.
dude, they're in and out every 2 years.
Right.
I don't remember who it was, but eventually when he was done being in Congress, he's like, I didn't do anything. He's like, the staff did all of the writing of the bills, all of the reading of the bills. He's
All
like,
the
my job
interns.
was just to call people and ask for money for my next election.
Exactly.
He's like, you get in and you've got basically 6 months to chill and then 12 months to get reelected, or 18 months to get reelected.
You see, that was actually one of the more
I remember what his name
enlightening
was.
things I learned when I did my short stint in political consulting was they spent the
Right.
whole goddamn time just asking for money.
Yeah.
That's the whole thing. It's just asking for money. But continuing what I was saying is they get to the Senate, and then when bad things come about, right, when, jobs don't come back, Social Security, they go back and they say, that wasn't me. I went to Senate and I demanded more jobs for the Ohio coal workers, and the EPA said we can't do it. And so, the Senate, it's not in their best interest to actually govern and do these things. It's in their best interest to politic and maneuver and slither their way into whatever is most popular to get themselves reelected.
You're exactly right.
So that's why people love their senators but hate Congress.
Mm-hmm.
That's the phenomenon. Is Pat Toomey's the best man of all time, but Senate approval ratings are in the low 20s sometimes.
It's like 12%.
Even lower, 12%. So you can't be expected to something's got to change. Something's got to change. So the legislative branch needs to take back some of its power that it's for, because when the legislative branch, which is Ezra Klein this week talking about the judicial branch undermining democracy.
That guy,
for example, right? That guy, the King Beta in his J. Crew sweaters when he's like 38 years old, still dresses like he's a 26-year-old intern. Because when the legislative branch forfeits its power, that's where you get the judiciary making rulings on the Affordable Care Act and gay marriage, and the executive branch just issuing executive orders that you claim are separating people from their families. Mm-hmm. So let's get it back to the legislative branch. Let's shrink government power and executive power and make it more manageable.
Well, I mean, I'd love to push it back to the states, but ideally, you get some time. Term limits would solve a lot of issues. If you put term limits in place, it would. I mean, senators and congressmen that are at the end of their term limit wouldn't have to worry about money. They'd have to then do their job for the last term. Hopefully, it would get the career politicians out of there, and you get people going in and out more of a revolving door, and they have less time to work for themselves as opposed to just to do the job for the time period and then leave. I mean, there's a number of ways proposed to fix it, but at the moment, Congress is essentially just abdicating its duty, positioning itself, and then building straw men as the executive branch grows. And, going back to Brett Kavanaugh, if he's going to fight that, if he can do, something from the bench to beat back against the administrative state, as it's called, these rogue bureaucracies, the EPA.
Unelected bureaucrats that make the laws that govern you.
Exactly.
That's what it is. These are unelected.
Exactly. They're unelected.
The deep state.
And we talk about
part
term
of this
limits
thing,
in Congress.
right?
How about a career long person at any of the federal bureaucracies? The EPA is obviously the easiest example, but they're there for life. You're a government employee. You can't get fired. Did you see that FBI agent dancing? And he dropped his gun and the gun went off.
Oh, yeah. And he's still allowed to carry a gun on and off duty?
Still allowed to carry on and off duty. And someone was like, what does it take to get fired from the FBI?
Nothing, dude. They're a bunch of cowboys over there.
If you shoot someone, or if you do what Lisa Page and Peter Strzok have done, all the chicanery over there, you can't get fired from the FBI for clear wrongdoing. So you're not going to get fired from any of the other administrative organizations for wrongdoing or for not doing your job well. It's a position for life.
And it's just so inefficient, and obviously so. I mean, you have people unelected, right? So someone will get elected and appointed to head of the EPA, right? Scott Pruitt just got kicked the hell out for being, a corrupt asshole and sort of taking advantage of his
He was the swamp.
position.
Talk about the swamp.
He was the swamp. But what will happen is you'll have, Scott Pruitt appointed to the EPA head. All of a sudden, he's running a department with 30,000 people at his behest.
Right.
And these, he doesn't know what he's doing. And so he's just sort of going around and letting them do what they've been doing. They're the professionals. Yeah. They know what they're talking about. And so people that you don't know are making these environmental laws.
Right. And if you really do dig in, like you hope some of these people do,
or interpreting
what
them,
you get is you get leaks. you get backlash. You get these people that have been there for 25 years, whether if it's a Republican or Democrat as the head of the department. They say, I know better than you. I've been here longer. I'm not rolling over. I'm not letting this happen. And, that's where you see the pushback within these own organizations, like especially like the Justice Department. Like so many times during this Russia case, it's like, why doesn't Trump or why doesn't Sessions, fire these people or clean up the department? It's because it's so deep and enrooted in there that it takes more than 4 years or 8 years. It takes longer than that.
It takes an entire paradigm shift in the way we govern, to be honest, in the way that our government is set up and oriented.
It just takes a shrinking of the government.
Yeah, that's what I mean.
That's almost unthinkable at this point.
And what's really diabolical in that, and I'm sort of was going to plan on going into this a little bit, and I always rail against the military-industrial complex, of course, but where it gets pretty sinister is those career-long people in the CIA and the FBI. So where you get Trump, for example, who, during the campaign talked about how we are in a bunch of these wars and it doesn't make sense. We're just wasting money. And, we have people like me who are like, I don't like the guy, but hey, man, that's a pretty good point. Like, why are we doing this? And they they bring you into a back room, they show you a folder and be like, listen, I've been in the jungle with the terrorist in the mountains for 15 years, and this is what's going on, and they're trying to do blank, 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 and we know more than you. Or do you want us to do it, or do you want you to do it and you be responsible if all these people die? And Trump's like, well, if people die, I'm responsible, so I guess I'm just going to listen to the experts. Right. You're the experts. You've been working for the FBI for 25 years. Why would I not listen to you? And for those guys, they are incentivized to have enemies so they could, increase their budget. They have to use their money somehow, right? The FBI and the CIA got to be running missions.
Right. I mean, it is interesting, just like Obama ran against, at least in theory, you thought you'd get some military shrinkage or some reduction in America's wars overseas, drone strikes, all that went up, all that continued. It seems to run apace regardless of political party in power, president in power.
And in some, I am sympathetic in a way that it would be very hard to have the weight of 350 million people on your back. That if something happens, it's on you. And there are people coming to you every day saying, there are these people in the world that want to blow up New York Harbor or want to set a nuke off in the harbor of Boston or something.
And that still is ongoing. Let's not.
And that's ongoing. So I'm saying, as much as I obviously am against it, it would take an act of moral courage to sort of push back against those people, and I would commend anyone who does that, obviously, as super courageous.
Well, sort of related to what we're talking about, and we can transition maybe from this point into NATO, because Trump was at NATO today.
Yeah.
Just the thought here, Matt. When's the last time you heard of ISIS? Where did ISIS go?
ISIS is held up in a small little enclave in Syria.
So you're the resident foreign policy wonkin expert, so you can give me an exact answer. But I'm saying for the layperson listening to the news.
Yeah.
Okay.
Oh, but what that means,
I haven't heard of ISIS in 4 or 5 months. I mean, Russia's taking all the airways in terms of our foremost enemy nowadays, but ISIS seems to be missing. We always have to have an enemy on the horizon though, and so it's pivoted because ISIS rightfully, as you can probably explain, has been pushed back. The caliphate's gone, and so now the enemy is Russia.
Well, and it's not for nothing that it's Russia.
No, not at all. I don't disagree.
Not that...
I'm more to your point of the industrial complex.
Right.
There's got to be someone on the forefront.
There's got to be someone on the forefront.
If we're not going to have nightly images of ISIS taking towns or capturing people and beheading them, then we'll just pivot to Russia.
Yeah, well, I mean, war is a racket, and war creates jobs and turns economies and boosts them and makes money, and it's really unfortunate. But with Trump at NATO, what he really wanted to hammer on and what he hammered on during the campaign is this idea that NATO countries don't pay their fair share for defense.
Right.
And there's a little bit of truth for that, but it's sort of, on its face, Trump is right. So, for example, let me see. I have this image brought up. I have a graph here that I can sort of bring up. So what it says here, its total defense spending by NATO countries is 918 billion total. And of that, the United Kingdom pays 60 billion, France pays 44 billion, Germany 41 billion, and the United States pays 664 billion. Yeah. So we pay more than all of them combined times 5, essentially. But so Trump's right, and I can't believe I said that, actually. He's right in that, in theory, we're paying for their defense, but that was sort of the purpose of NATO. Like, that's how it was set up.
I mean, well, I don't know if that's how it was. I don't think I'd agree that that's how it was set up, but that's how it's always functioned. You know, we act like it's a group of equal nations where we provide for equal defense, but we all know it's the United States. When UN peacekeepers go in, it's the United States. Like, it's
you know, not necessarily. I mean, maybe more historically, but now more, you know, UN peacekeepers. I was actually just reading an interesting article that I think 1/4 of UN forces are now from Africa.
Wow.
I think from developing countries. It's sort of like a way for them to prove themselves and join the international, you know, community. Whether or not you agree that there should be a network of nations that do that sort of thing is up for debate.
Maybe not NATO's actual physical body of troops, but
sorry. You're right though. I was thinking
the money.
NATO.
And the
I was talking about the UN. You're right. I'm sorry.
The UN.
My fault.
The money. Oh yes, the UN. Yeah. The money and the might of NATO is the United States. There's really no doubt about that.
Well, you know, and this is sort of what I want to talk about. You have to think about how this whole thing was formulated. And before I do that, I just want to play a video of Trump talking at NATO and Angela Merkel, the Chancellor of Germany's response that I'll read out for you.
Go ahead.
Germany is totally controlled by Russia because they were getting from 60 to 70% of their energy from Russia and a new pipeline. And you tell me if that's appropriate, because I think it's not. And I think it's a very bad thing for NATO, and I don't think it should have happened. And I think we have to talk to Germany about it. Germany is a captive of Russia because they got rid of their coal plants, they got rid of their nuclear. They're getting so much of the oil and gas from Russia. I think it's something that NATO has to look at. I think it's very inappropriate. You and I agree that it's inappropriate. I don't know what you can do about it now, but it certainly doesn't seem to make sense that they pay billions of dollars to Russia, and now we have to defend them against Russia.
So that end point is kind of a good point. And what Trump is talking about in terms of oil and natural gas, like Gazprom, right, is like the big natural gas exporter from Russia when they tried to semi-privatize their natural gas exports and oil reserves. It's still basically a Kremlin cutout, obviously, right? It's all packed with Putin's friends and what have you. But there's pipelines called the Nord Stream pipeline, the Nord Stream 2 pipeline that's being built. Basically, it bypasses the Balkan states straight to Germany's shores. And what I don't understand about this is that, after World War II, the idea of how to prevent wars,
right,
for coming nations, for all nations, is to tie them economically. Because while it's true that Germans pay Russians billions in oil, the Russians are also reliant that Germany is going to pay billions in oil, right? It's not like Russia can just shut off the heat to Germany and all of a sudden they're sitting pretty, right? Russia needs that money. They want that money. And so when borders are, when goods and trade is crossing borders, it's fine. When economies stop and borders close and they stop doing trade, troops cross borders.
Right.
That's sort of the dichotomy. So I
agree with that.
I get where he's kind of coming from in theory. Like, yo, Russia, you pay Russia money. That means you need Russia. It's like, well, no, Russia actually needs Germany to pay them as well. Right? This is how we don't start
I get
wars.
You're saying it, but
this is why we tied this is why we tied together oil and steel, right? Oil and arms after World War II, Germany and France, right? We tied them together because we thought, hey, if you tie together the war-making materials, they won't go to war together because they need one another to survive.
No, I mean, obviously you proved he has a valid point, and I think what you just sort of rebutted with is valid as well. But if it came down to it, I think that the essentially with this pipeline as well is Germany is becoming overly reliant. It's no longer just an economic transaction where we get the necessary gas we need and you get obviously the money that you want for it. They're closing down all nuclear by, I think it's 2024. They're fully shuttering their own nuclear programs entirely, all in Germany.
I haven't really read too much about. I haven't read too much about that, so I'm just going off of what you say. That sure. I mean, I'm just a little skeptical because, in Europe, nuclear is sort of seen as like the way.
In France, it is. It's up to
right.
I think 50% in terms of their national.
Correct. Because it's cleaner. It's cleaner. It's more efficient.
Exactly. Germany is shuttering nuclear. They've been closing coal, but yet they'll take natural gas from Russia via this pipeline. It's going to be, at least from the United States perspective, when Rex Tillerson was still Secretary of State, he came out against this pipeline saying it's a disproportionate amount of their total energy supply. And then in addition to just how much that they're relying on it, how much money it's going to be coming from Germany to Russia. And Trump sees that essentially as, well, okay, they're not hitting their own quota militarily. We're hitting ours more than enough. We're providing their defense. And so our money, may not be directly, but is sort of kind of going from us because Germany's not paying it to Russia. And he's not entirely wrong there.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Would the United States, Matt, would you want the United States saying, just say, I'm pretty sure it's more than, but let's just say 10% of our total energy for the United States from a pipeline from China? I would not be in favor of that.
I guess not. I mean, I guess it all depends whether or not it's like, because, and this is why I say semi cut out of the Kremlin, is because technically they are buying it from Russia. But I mean, like, if it was just a Chinese oil company, I wouldn't care.
Okay, but all right, Matt, when the tanks cross borders, is that we're an independent company going to hold up in China?
But there's the thing also, because tanks don't cross borders like that anymore. And this is what I wanted to sort of hit on and frame it, this whole NATO conversation, because why the neoliberals are freaking out about this is because they very much enjoy Pax Americana, where the United States leads the international order and sets the norms, and you sort of have to understand where that comes from, right? So that comes from, and we're going to do a little history lesson real quick. So that comes from, before World War II, as people know, besides a little bit in World War I, the United States was very much an isolationist country. Isolationist in the sense that we did trade, but militarily. We didn't necessarily get involved in keeping with the founding father principles. We just didn't bother ourselves with other country affairs.
Right.
And on December 7th, 1941, a day which FDR in front of a joint session of Congress would coin a day that lived in infamy. Pearl Harbor happens, 2,400 Americans are killed, 400 Imperial Japanese planes drop bombs on the Pacific Fleet because they don't want they foresee the United States eventually becoming involved, and Japan was sort of on this tirade of destruction and abuse across all of Southeast Asia. They attacked us, and the United States was sort of forced into going to war. Now, you can debate whether or not they were going to go into war anyway.
Right.
But, I mean, I think it's fair to say they'd probably get involved sooner or later. But that was sort of the day everything changed. And with the United States entering World War II, the United States started building up our armed forces. We started to have these factories. You see the posters, the propaganda posters, buy war bonds, help donate metal to the cause, right?
Yeah,
donate
Rosie
food, Rosie the Riveter. And what we were talking about earlier is war is very beneficial for an economy.
Right.
And the United States, from World War II and out of World War II, because they came out on top, right? We dropped the bomb on Hiroshima and Nagasaki, which sort of cemented the United States as the big kid on the block, the big kid in the playground that could boss everyone around. And what neoliberals, or what both liberals and conservatives wanted going forward from that is the United States was going to be the big kid on the playground that stood up for the little guy. Whether that happened or not, you can, debate. That's sort of like their version of a city, shining city on a hill. Like, that's what they aspire to be.
Sure, the global peacekeeper.
They aspire to be global peacekeepers, essentially. And so after World War II, the United States was one of the few economies that wasn't decimated, right? Western Europe decimated after their second war in 40 years. And so we rebuild Europe, we rebuild Japan. But in 1944, the world ends, then the Berlin Wall goes up. And so there was no time for the United States to shift and say, okay, we need to stop the wartime economy production. It was, holy shit, now there's a country in Russia who's building the bomb, and we have to be prepared if the Reds come rolling over into Europe. So we got to start building tanks. We got to start building aircraft. We got to start building carriers. What are we doing? Why are we sitting around? We did this. It's very profitable for our economy. And,
Now, hindsight's 20/20, but that's the correct response at the time. I would be hard-pressed to think that if I was alive at that time, I would not be calling for an increased military as I see the threat.
Right, no. Oh, I'm not blaming them at all.
Right.
I mean, from their perspective, there's this evil scourge of communism that really is spreading throughout the world. And the United States, we sort of
never pivoted from that mindset.
We never pivoted from the mindset of this is how wars are going to be fought, like World War II. Like World War II, we watch. That's why we love the movies. We love the movies because it's a bunch of Americans sitting in foxholes with tanks screaming overhead, right? And there's snipers in the tower we watch in Bordeaux, France, and the Big Red One are storming through the fields, and we love that stuff. But that's not really how wars were going to be fought after World War II. I mean, Korea, it was a little bit of that, but then you get into, situations like Vietnam where we're not fighting against a state. We're not fighting against Russia, right? Where we capture the capital and we win. We're fighting against an ideology, a party of these, disparate groups, the Viet Cong. And so what was the objective? We didn't have an objective. There was
if you're not fighting the country directly, we've sort of just now engaged in proxy wars where we fund different groups in areas where they don't have, fully modernized societies where they then clash in sort of the battlefields you just described. But it's not the nations coming together. It's our funded proxies.
Right. It's not Vietnam versus the United States. It's the United States versus the Viet Cong. Or it's the United States versus Al-Qaeda that would eventually happen. Or, Russia had their own version of this when we funded the Taliban and and Al-Qaeda in the 80s during their Afghanistan war, where Russia had a brutal occupation of Afghanistan where they're just rolling tanks through, blowing everything up, because that's the way wars are fought. You blow things up, and then people give up. And so in the 90s, when the Soviet Union fell and collapsed, right? We've talked about before. Their economic system couldn't keep up with the United States level of production. They were a failing system. They really were a paper tiger in the sense that it was all for show. The Soviet Union goes away. We were building up for 40 years for a war that never happened. And so right as the United States rolls up the brand new Abrams tank that's, a mobile island that's meant to mow down some Ruskies on the march to Moscow, that's not necessary anymore. Now we're fighting terrorist cells, and now we're fighting cyber attacks, and now we're fighting potential terrorist attacks with nuclear arms, for example, or people attacking financial institutions. I mean, David Sanger of the New York Times just released a book that I meant to pick up called The Perfect Weapon, and it's sort of how cyber attacks are being used by states and governments like Russia, like China, to attack corporate and North Korea, to attack
the Sony hack by
corporations. That's dangerous. That's a new type of warfare who no one in the 1980s even could imagine that this was possible, and it has the potential to wreck societies, wreck economies. But we never changed. Right, like we were saying earlier, you still have these senators that are in North Carolina who their constituents work at a helicopter factory, and they need to make Black Hawk helicopters for their jobs, and so the senator's going to go and vote to make more Black Hawk helicopters. That's just how it is. And so we're on this track of producing for wars that aren't going to happen. I just don't know where it ends. But with the United States during that entire process, it's Pax Americana. The United States rules the world, right? I mean, we're the strongest. We're the biggest kid on the block. And so it was sort of just assumed that we are protecting them against this Soviet scourge. But in reality, Russia isn't going to invade Europe. Like, Russia isn't going after Germany anymore. They're playing this other sinister game. I mean, they want Ukraine because they think Ukraine is Soviet. They think it's Russia. They want Crimea.
I hear what you're saying, and I agree with a lot of what you said, and I agree that we're not pivoting enough to the issues that are going to be coming either now or in the future, the cyber attacks, the financial institution attacks.
Obama
admitted.
The
soft target attacks.
Barack Obama admitted, for when Russia did launch an attack on our election system, for example, right, we weren't really prepared. There's nothing we could do. We didn't have a response because we're sending Navy SEALs to the Congo to fight fucking Boko Haram.
But
sorry.
I don't think you can fully pivot away from, a prepared defense in terms of the old-fashioned way. You just said Russia, isn't going to want to invade Germany. Well, I mean, they're perfectly willing to invade Georgia or the Ukraine, and sure, they might have some old historic ties to that, but let's not think that China would not, invade Taiwan, or let's not think that China hasn't forgotten, the 70-year-old grudge with Japan from World War II, and that they wouldn't act on that if not for the United States and the threat that we still pose and the threat that NATO poses, even though the bulk of it. Yeah, I mean, and that's what I'm saying.
I don't know. I mean, well, I don't think China's ever launched a war of aggression, if that's correct. Like, I don't think China's planning to go to war with Japan. Like, I mean, I'm not really worried about that. I mean, I think China is sort of right now with their rise and sort of loosening of they're sort of, to be honest, they've been forced to sort of like change the way they govern and sort of fit whatever their version of communism is because the markets are working. Yeah, because the markets work, right? Hong Kong.
That's probably going to be on the next docket because Trump is planning $200 billion in tariff increases. He's going full-scale trade war with China, and it's.
I don't understand.
No, I think he wants to break their back, dude. And look, their growing economy is at recently like 6.8%.
But what,
which is unheard of.
So why is it bad for China to have a big economy?
It's not. I think his Trump's shtick, and it always has been since the 80s, has been, we're getting ripped off. I mean, you can literally go back to him in the 80s and in the 90s on ABC Meet the Press talking about that. Mm-hmm. Talking about we're getting ripped off, we're a bunch of suckers. Like, that isn't a new shtick for him. He's been saying that for a very long time. And whether there's valid claims to that or not, he sees it that he believes that we are getting ripped off. And there's no doubt that China is stealing intellectual property, that they're flirting with currency, that they're acting outside the bounds of what most of the rest of the world has adopted as fair play economically. And I think his thing is,
you want to talk about fair play economically? You want to talk about the Federal Reserve?
Yeah. Well, all right. Yeah. Good point.
Come on.
Good point. Well, yeah. I mean, nothing I can really say about that. But the thing is, I think at least in Trump's mind, we are still the larger and more powerful economy. And at least I'm trying to rationalize whatever he's doing here. But if I were to rationalize it, the most rational perspective that you could take is probably, while we're still bigger and can exert force economically, we might as well, put pressure on the Chinese through these tariffs to get them back within bounds of what's acceptable economically.
I guess. I just don't know at what cost. I mean, I'm not worried because the trend of China, as I understand it right now, is that they are liberalizing markets. And it's not perfect. It's not the way we want it to be. But, I'm okay with millions of people in China being pulled out of poverty over this long period of time.
But let's not pretend that they're getting freedom along with those markets.
They're getting some freedom. And obviously, I'd want them to be.
I'm not disagreeing with you. They are getting some freedom more than they had in former times.
China's a really interesting case because they've been able to suppress a whole nation, right? They've been able to, have their own version of Facebook or iMessage where the government reads everything you do. and they're sort of
Right.
okay with that in a weird way. At least some of them are. So China's a strange example. What I mean with Russia is, and what the liberal freakout is over NATO, is that they think we should still be preparing for a war that I don't think is going to happen or is unrealistic to happen. What we should be doing is spending NATO's money for things like cybersecurity.
No, I'm not in disagreement about that at all. I think if you take our entire budget, which you read out earlier, you could devote a much larger percentage to the things that you think, and I also think, are much more likely to be the wars of the future. But I don't think you can pivot away yet from that deterrent threat of still a conventional military war. Because the evidence is there, dude. They went into Crimea. It's not like they're not doing it right. They knew with Georgia in, what was that, 2010, and they knew with Crimea recently.
2008, I think. Yeah.
Somewhere.
Yeah, somewhere in that.
They knew that those were lines they could step over. Now rolling right into Germany, that's a line they definitely can't cross. You know what I'm saying?
Right. Yeah.
So going back to the pipeline and the whole issue that Trump brought up at NATO today is, you don't want to make yourself that exposed where, say they roll into another country, not Germany, but they push deeper into the Ukraine. Germany decides to put up a response, and Russia just turns that pipeline off. They say, we'll take the hit from the money we're not going to get, but you're not going to have 20% of your natural supplies. Like that. It's things you have to weigh, and I think there's other ways that.
I guess that's fair, and also like was it the 80s or the 90s, the OPEC gas crisis, where sort of in response to supporting Israel and not supporting Palestine, the OPEC countries sort of like limited gas prices. Remember, like our parents will tell stories they had gas lines down the street. So, I mean, that's fair to say. It's a fair point.
And this whole conversation we've been having, which I'm enjoying, I think it's your points you made are great. We're ignoring the Middle East, which I think is the most volatile region in the whole world. Imagine something between the Israel and Iran takes place. You don't know what Russia's going to do, but maybe they take Iran's side, and maybe Germany takes Israel's side, and they just turn the pipeline off. Like I think there's just so many things you have to factor in there.
True. I mean, going along with Iran, interesting enough, I don't know if you saw, but I mean, there have been crazy protests.
Yeah.
In Iran, and some stuff I love seeing. I love seeing Iranian women take off their hijab and throw that shit down.
That's real feminism.
And tell the mullahs to go fuck themselves. I love that.
Did you see the girl got 8 years in jail for dancing?
Yeah, I mean, you see, Gavin McInnes, who says things in a real hyperbolic, sensational fashion, but in a funny way sometimes, because, it's like, the liberals want Nazis so bad, and they go, where can we find Nazis? Ron Paul's intern tweeted a photo, and someone that wrote for his newsletter 20 years ago wrote some bad stuff. Nothing that Ron Paul's ever written has ever been racist or bad. Ron Paul, former gynecologist, while he's helping people with legit medicine, like actually helping people,
right.
And he's actually a closet racist. And what I never understand with these people is, like, Ron Paul agrees with that racist cartoon, but he deleted it? Like, if he agrees with it, why wouldn't he just keep it up? Like, why is he so scared, and why does he preach about liberty and peace so much if he's secretly a racist? I don't understand. What a pretty bad racist. But Gavin McInnes would be like, they want Nazis. Meanwhile, mullahs in Iran are screaming, we're right here. We're putting women in jail for dancing. Hey, we won't let women go outside without Saudi Arabia. They have to have a male guardian. Hey, they just got to learn to drive. We passed a law showing people how to beat their wives. We're over here, feminists, please. And feminists are just like, no, Brett Kavanaugh is a danger to our democracy. And you're like, holy shit, you guys have zero perspective. But I just find that really funny. And I think
they're not listening to you, Matt. They're not getting a history lesson from 1941 to present, in 6-minute fashion.
They should be listening to don't share that, because I'm sure history professors would be
screaming. Stop reading Huffington Post, turn off MSNBC, turn on the Ombudsman Report. And I think that's a great place to stop. We went for an hour and 5 minutes. Every single time, man, you start one of these things, we always are like, holy shit, man, I don't know if we can fill 15. If we can finish like half an hour, I think we may be able to make. I might be able to make some stupid jokes. Yeah, I got enough notes here, enough back reading for a half hour. We make it an hour every time.
If I do a poor Trump impression, maybe that'll add 5 minutes. but we end up talking for an hour and 5 minutes, and I think this has been one of the more productive and fruitful conversations that we've had. So
sure.
With that, we're going to end the Ombudsman Report. That's episode 20. What a great episode to end on. You can give us a follow. I recommend everyone, theombudsmanreport.com, at Ombudsman Report on Twitter. My name is Matthew Spurrier again, at Planet Politico on Twitter. Bobby Juliana. Go find him at Bobby J Politics. He's always serving up hot takes about the debt, especially.
Yeah.
Share this video on YouTube. Like, comment, subscribe. Give us a follow on Twitter and iTunes. Make sure you hit that subscribe button. That really helps us out. Anything you want to say, Bob, before we sign off for the week?
No, good episode. Everyone get out of their bubbles, put their phones down, and live a real life. We'll bring you the news next week.
Beautiful weather out there. Go live a real life. Go for a walk or something, you degenerates. All right. Thanks for listening, guys. Talk to you next week. Peace.